Hello everyone, my name is Viyaan Chaudhry. Today I am going to talk about retrogression of planets, and the basic understanding of a retrograde planet is that when seen from Earth or from Earth's perspective, when a planet appears to be going backwards or in reverse, it is called as being in retrograde motion or Vakragati. And by retrogression of planets, I only mean the 5 Tattva planets, which are Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter and Saturn. These 5 planets as seen from Earth are usually direct in their motion. That is, they are generally moving in forward direction. And when they are moving in forward direction, they are following the path of the Sun and the Moon, because the Sun and Moon are always direct. That is, they are always moving in forward direction because they understand that time always moves forward and never looks back. This forward or direct motion of planets is also symbolic of seeking progress or growth all the time. However, the retrograde planets, because they appear to be moving backwards, are following the path of Rahu, who is always in retrograde or backward motion. Now, a retrograde planet is following Rahu because of all things Rahu represents. Our desires that cause our rebirth is the primary signification of Rahu. And the retrograde or backward motion is symbolic of going back in time into our past lives to indicate our unfulfilled desires from our past lives. Therefore, if any of the 5 Tattva planets is retrograde, then that planet is also going to behave like Rahu. That retrograde planet is going to tell us a very strong desire of yours that has caused your rebirth. And because that planet is normally not retrograde, that planet becoming retrograde is a serious matter, because the desire attached to such a retrograde planet is 3 times stronger than any other desire. Which is why if you have a retrograde planet in your chart, then instead of Rahu, it is the retrograde planet who is now going to show the desire which has caused your rebirth. In short, the retrograde planet has superseded Rahu in indicating the desire of your rebirth. Seldom are the times when Rahu gets dislodged, that too from his own territory. And therefore, a retrograde planet becomes far more important than any other planet in the chart. Even the desires of the Atmakarak have to wait while the retrograde planet is out there chasing its desires. Now, the advantage of such a situation is that because the desire associated with the retrograde planet is so strong, it gives you focus. And the disadvantage of this situation is because there is a strong desire, it will prevent you from taking sannyasa and subsequently pursuing moksha. Because the retrograde planet causes tremendous attachment to this world, and this attachment is related to a desire of either enjoying or achieving something in this world. But having a strong desire and getting that desire fulfilled are 2 different scenarios, because the retrograde planet in form of Rahu is actually dangling a carrot in front of us and we are just running after it. But that carrot is like a mirage which is not really there. It is a hope which will not see its fruition. It is a dream which will either not manifest, or even if it manifests, it will ultimately be snatched from you. You will be denied of it. And this is why the original term for retrograde was coined by Maharshi Parashara as Vakra. Not Vakri, but Vakra, because Vakra is another name for Mars, that is Mangala. So a retrograde planet also has an energy of Mars in it, because the unfulfillment of your desires also ignite the emotion of anger within you. And there can be no peace within when there is a Martian energy involved. Now, before delving into further challenges related to a retrograde planet, let us know as to where exactly is the desire represented by a retrograde planet in the horoscope. See, in the natural zodiac or natural horoscope starting from Aries, we all know that it is the 7th house which is the source and seat of all desires, which is why our rebirth also happens from the 7th house. And this is also the reason why the 7th house represents this world, that is this Bhuloka, whereas 8th house represents Bhuvaloka, 9th house represents Swargaloka, and so on. The 7th house is also the Digbal house of Rahu, which is why a retrograde planet behaving like Rahu is having the strong desire that caused your rebirth in the 7th house from its placement. So it is the 7th house from a retrograde planet that is representing the desire which has caused your rebirth. Now, it is also a common knowledge between people that a retrograde planet gives the result of being in the opposite sign, although this understanding is not completely correct. The strong desire of the retrograde planet is in the 7th house from its placement, but this neither means that it has permanently shifted to the 7th house from itself, nor it means that it is giving the result of the opposite sign all the time. Then how does a retrograde planet work in giving its effects? For this, I'll have to mention about the transit of planets. The word transit in astrological context is the current movement of planets in the sky while we are living our lives. And let me use an example chart now to better explain the scenario of retrogression. This is an example chart where you can see that Saturn is placed in the 8th house in Scorpio and it is retrograde as there is a line below the abbreviation for Saturn. In some softwares, there is also a bracket around the abbreviation of the planet to mark it as retrograde. Now in the note besides the chart, you will see that in 2024, Saturn in transit will start its retrograde motion from 29th of June and it will remain in retrograde motion until 15th of November. That is for about 4.5 months. When seen from Earth, Saturn will seem to be going in backward or retrograde motion. And on 15th November, it will go back to its direct or forward motion again. Now what's going to happen when Saturn turns retrograde on 29th of June is, the retrograde Saturn in this example chart will immediately jump to the opposite sign from its placement. That is, from being in the 8th house in Scorpio, Saturn will straight away shift to be in the 2nd house in Taurus and it will remain in 2nd house in Taurus for the entire retrograde transit of Saturn, and the moment Saturn turns direct in transit on 15th November, it will go back to its original placement in the 8th house in Scorpio. And this shift of Saturn to the 7th house from itself and back will keep happening every year for the rest of your life as Saturn goes retrograde in transit every year for about 4.5 months. So usually for about 7.5 months of the year, Saturn will be in the 8th house in Scorpio and the remaining 4.5 months it will be in the 2nd house in Taurus. Now you might be wondering as to why this backward motion of Saturn in the sky is triggering this opposite shift of the planet in the horoscope. The answer to this is very simple, which I've also mentioned before, that the backward motion of a planet is symbolic of the planet going in the past into our past lives to indicate our deepest and strongest desires that have caused our rebirth. And in the natural horoscope, it is the 7th house which is the seat and source of all desires. Therefore, the retrograde motion somehow triggers an energy in the planet to give an effect as if it has completely shifted to the 7th house from its placement. And this magical and drastic shift is evidence enough to show how strong the desire is, which causes such an unbelievable shift in the placement of a retrograde planet. Now, although a retrograde planet is placed in one place at a time, but because of this constant shifting to the opposite sign and back, the energy within the retrograde planet is of both the placements, that is, the original as well as the 7th house from its placement. But there is a difference. See, the focus and desire of a retrograde planet is completely in the 7th house from its placement. But it is as if the mind of the retrograde planet is in its original placement, but the heart of the retrograde planet is in the 7th house from its placement. So if you have a retrograde planet in your chart, then you will also have the energy of both the original as well as the opposite placement of the retrograde planet. And because of this dual energy existing within you, there will also be a constant conflict and frustration within you, because what you want is in the 7th house from the retrograde planet, but somehow your destiny will keep bringing you back to the original placement of the retrograde planet, and this will create a constant conflict and frustration within you. So although it is worth acknowledging that a desire is so strong that it is causing such a radical shift in the placement of a retrograde planet, and because of this strong desire, you will also work really hard to achieve or fulfill that desire, yet the fact that a retrograde planet always comes back to its original placement is also indicative of the harsh reality that no matter how strong your desire is, no matter how hard you work for it, you will always be far away from manifesting it. And why do I say far away? Because the 7th house from any house or planet is considered the farthest from that house or planet. Which is why when a retrograde planet comes back to its original placement, it has actually gone the farthest from the house of its desire. It is like no matter how hard you work to reach that 7th house, your destiny will keep bringing you back to square one. And even if you manifest that desire, it will only last for a short while and then it is destined to go away. Because the 7th house is also a Kshaya Bhava, that is the house of death and destruction. It is the house of going away. 7th house is a Vayu Kendra, the wind quadrant, and Vayu is separative in nature. So 7th house, especially in the current context, is also representing something that is going away or bound to go away. Which is why Guruji Sanjay mentions that without studying the retrograde planets, we can never really understand the sorrow and frustration a person experiences in his life. Now let me use this example chart itself to explain the sorrow and frustration a person will go through because of a retrograde planet, which is Saturn in this case. Now in this example chart, Saturn is the 10th lord and it is placed in Scorpio. And Saturn in Scorpio, amidst all career options, can give you a career as a mechanical engineer. So consider this person working as a mechanical engineer. But the strong desire because of which this person has come on this planet is related to Saturn being in Taurus. And Saturn in Taurus can generally give a career in acting and entertainment. So the desire with which this person has come on this planet is to live a life as an actor. However, no matter how hard he will try for it, no matter how good he will be as an actor, this desire will remain elusive to him. And then somehow his life will drag him to mechanical engineering and he will start considering mechanical engineering as his secondary interest while feeling the sorrow of being denied the only wish he had for his life on this planet. So because mechanical engineering is coming from the original placement of the 10th lord, he will have the capability and interest in it, but because the entire desire and heart of the retrograde 10th lord is in the opposite sign, so while he'll be working as a mechanical engineer, there will be a constant conflict and opposition within him that what he is doing is not what he wanted to do. Because as we now know that a retrograde planet is representing two different interests or significations, which is always going to cause a constant battle within you. Because the 7th house of the natural zodiac not only represents love, it also represents war. And when there are two different significations or interests involved, there can be no love or cooperation between them. So this will be the scenario if you have a retrograde planet associated with your career or profession. Now what will happen if a retrograde planet is associated with your personal life, that is your love, relationship or marriage? Let us have an understanding of that now. So in the context of relationship and marriage, it has been taught in the parampara that if a man has a planet in the 4th house of his Rashi chart, then the nature and qualities he will look for in his spouse will be according to the planet he has in the 4th house of his Rashi chart. And for a female, it will be the 10th house which will decide what kind of a partner she is looking for. So for example, these are the two charts belonging to a film star couple. Both are superstars of India, and although I have avoided mentioning their names, but any serious student of astrology would know to which film star couple these two charts belong. Now the husband has Saturn in his 4th house, so the nature and qualities he'll be looking for in his partner will be associated with Saturn, and he will get attracted towards a lady whose Lagna is either lorded by Saturn, or Saturn will be placed in the Dharma Trikona of her Rashi or Navamsha chart, or Saturn will be a dominant planet in her chart. And as we can see in the wife's chart that her Lagna is indeed lorded by Saturn. But Saturn in the charts of both husband and wife is retrograde, and Guruji Pandit Sanjay, while discussing the chart of this legendary film star husband, had mentioned about the retrograde Saturn in his 4th house. So what will happen if a man has a retrograde planet in his 4th house? Let us know from an audio clip of Guruji Pandit Sanjay. Here's the audio.
Lagna Lord is, he has Saturn in the 4th house, can you see that? And do you see Saturn is retrograde in the 4th house? So what happens when Saturn becomes retrograde in the 4th house? When in transit Saturn will become direct, he wants to be with a lady who is having Saturn Lagna. When in transit Saturn becomes retrograde, he wants to go away from her.
Now I hope you understand that the husband would want to go away from his spouse because during the retrograde transit, Saturn in the husband's chart will no longer be in the 4th house to generate that desire in him of being with a partner ruled by Saturn. And going away from spouse will not always mean physically going away, but it will be synonymous to the fact that the husband will not feel the desire of being with a partner ruled by Saturn, as Saturn will not be in the 4th house to generate that desire. So in short, if a retrograde planet is placed in a house which has to do with your relationship or marriage, this going away and coming back, or having a desire and then not having a desire for the partner, will be a feature, because that is exactly the feature of a retrograde planet, as it keeps going away from its original placement and comes back. And even in the wife's chart, if you observe, Saturn is in the 7th house of spouse, representing her film star husband, and the retrogression of Saturn again confirms that not only her film star husband will have a tendency of going away and coming back, or in other words having a desire for her and then not having a desire for her, but even the wife will experience a similar change in emotions with every retrograde transit of Saturn. Now let me mention another example for just a further perspective on this topic. This is the chart of Ranveer Singh, another lead actor of the Hindi film industry, and his wife Deepika Padukone, who is also a film star, as we all know. Now Deepika had mentioned in the last season of Coffee with Karan that she would meet other people, but in her mind it was like she is going back to him. Now this going back term used by Deepika made me curious to just check if in Ranveer Singh's chart she is being represented by a retrograde planet, and it did not take me long to understand that it is the retrograde Jupiter in his 5th house of love that is representing Deepika. His Jupiter is in Capricorn and Deepika is Capricorn Lagna with her Jupiter also in Capricorn, which confirms that in Ranveer's chart this Jupiter in Capricorn is representing Deepika as his lady love. Now one thing you have to understand that this physical going away will not happen always, and it is rather the emotional change or the absence of desire for the partner a person will experience with every retrograde transit. And the reaction to this absence of desire will vary depending upon where exactly each relationship is. And this is why a relationship from a retrograde planet becomes a bit challenging in life. With this, let me talk about another aspect of life and the effect of a retrograde planet in it. So now I want to talk about the 11th house of Rashi chart and the effect of a retrograde planet being placed in it. For this, I have mentioned this paragraph from Guruji Sanjay's book, Crux of Vedic Astrology. This paragraph is on page 428 of the book. And this paragraph talks about planets in the 11th house of Rashi chart. See, generally, planets in the 11th house give us income or financial gains from the activities they govern. For example, if Sun is in the 11th house, you can earn from government. If Moon is in the 11th house, being a bureaucrat can be the source of your income. Mars in the 11th house, you can earn as an army officer or a policeman, and so on. So if you observe the paragraph I have highlighted in blue, which reads as, if Rahu is in the 11th house, the results of one's actions will come suddenly, while Saturn will delay the fruits. And then it is mentioned that retrograde planets can even deny the fruits of actions until they become direct in transit. So whatever work or effort you do relating to a retrograde planet in the 11th house, the income from that work or the fruits of those efforts will only come when the planet is direct in transit, because during its retrograde transit, it will be in the 5th house and not in the 11th house of income. Let me share an example chart to mention an interesting fact about a retrograde planet in the 11th house. Now this position of retrograde Jupiter in the 11th house belongs to an astrologer friend of mine. He started his practice as an astrologer 2 years ago, and whenever Jupiter becomes direct in transit, a friend of this astrologer suddenly contacts him and tells him that he has a client for him. So for 2 years in a row, as soon as Jupiter becomes direct in transit, somehow his friend ends up bringing a client for him. And therefore, the first consultation he does after Jupiter becomes direct in transit is of a client brought by his friend, as 11th house also represents our friends. So it is a no-brainer that when Jupiter becomes direct in transit and comes back to the 11th house of income and friends, the first income he gets is through a friend of his. And the friend of this astrologer has his Lagna lorded by Mars, and his Jupiter is in a water sign. Just like in the 11th house of this astrologer, the sign belongs to Mars and it is a water sign. So I hope all this information has given you a good and new perspective on retrograde planets, and let me now talk about the houses or the bhavas which are lorded by a retrograde planet and what will be your experience regarding those houses. Now the houses lorded by a retrograde planet also become extremely important for you in a sense that whatever these houses represent or stand for, your desires will also be pertaining to those aspects of your life. So apart from the 7th house from the retrograde planet, the houses lorded by a retrograde planet will also be the focal point of your life. The primary desires of your life will be centered around the houses owned by a retrograde planet. But apparently, these houses owned by a retrograde planet will also indicate those areas of your life in which you will have a lot of frustration, anguish and pain, because there will be no satisfaction from these houses and the areas of your life they will be representing. These houses will be the reason of you feeling dissatisfied with your life, and you will continue to have a major craving in relation to these houses. So these will be the challenges relating to the houses governed by a retrograde planet. Now let us talk about the challenges relating to the planet itself who becomes retrograde in your chart. See, at the highest level, a planet is a significator, and the signification of a planet gets severely afflicted if it becomes retrograde in your chart. And of all significations, the natural signification, which is the Naisargik Karakatva of a planet, gets the most afflicted. So for example, the natural signification of Venus is love, relationship and marriage. So if Venus is retrograde in your chart, then love, relationship and marriage will become the most challenging and disappointing aspect of your life. Likewise, if Jupiter is retrograde, you will either have sorrow of not having children, or even if you have children, then they will become the reason of sorrow in your life in some form or manner. Likewise, you can observe the natural signification of planets and understand which aspect of your life will have severe challenges and disappointments. Now, before ending this lecture, I'll share another interesting feature related to a retrograde planet. Now, as you know that a retrograde planet keeps going to the opposite sign and comes back. And generally, the impact of this shifting of the planet on your mind will be so subtle that you won't even realize it. However, if you undergo the Mahadasha of a planet who is retrograde in your chart, and because the Mahadasha planet has a complete control on your mind, then during the Mahadasha of a retrograde planet, you will literally and completely feel this shift of the retrograde planet to the opposite sign and back. For example, if I use the previous example chart again, where the 10th Lord Saturn was retrograde and placed in Scorpio, then let's say if this person enters Saturn Mahadasha, and then on 29th June 2024 at around 11:30 pm, Saturn will go retrograde in transit. Then it will hardly take 2 to 3 hours from 11:30 pm for the retrograde effect to reach this person's mind. Which means by about 1:30 or maximum 2:30 am, his mind will suddenly feel the effect of Saturn being in Taurus, which will mean that he will suddenly feel detached from mechanical engineering, and simultaneously his desire of becoming an actor will engross his mind with such intensity that if at all he was already making efforts to become an actor, he will increase those efforts by 3 times, and he will just continue to work as a mechanical engineer in that detached state just because it will be paying the bills. And this increased intensity of the desire of being an actor will remain in his mind until Saturn will be retrograde in transit. And the moment Saturn will become direct in transit, somehow his detachment with mechanical engineering will end and the intensity of the acting desire will subside, but it will never leave him. And this shift of strong influence on his mind will keep happening every year for the rest of his Saturn Mahadasha. So this was my lecture on retrogression of planets. If you liked this lecture, you may give this video a thumbs up. If you would like to see more of such lectures, you may subscribe to my channel. And for consultations, you may visit my website www.viyaanastrologist.com. Thank you.